Okay, we'll get cracking. Anybody that joins can obviously pick up as we go through. First things first, what we'll do is just do a couple of introductions, and then I'll just outline what we're going to cover in the next, hopefully sort of 45 to 50 minutes, and then with some time for Q&A at the end. So my name's Duncan Bennett. I am Managing Director of Not Sport. Since 2012, we've been the official facility partners to England Hockey. Also on the call or on the meeting webinar is Joe Hawley, who is a facility development manager for England Hockey. I'll let Joe say a quick hello. There we go.
Let's go. Thank you. Hi all, welcome to today's webinar. My name's Joe Hawley, as Duncan kindly introduced me. My current patch at the moment, for all of those that are involved within England Hockey, is the Southwest, South Central and Southeast, and some elements of the North. And I've got another colleague, Simon Dowdy, who will be joining the webinar shortly. So welcome all.
Thanks, Joe. So yeah, we'll crack on. So as I say, my name's Duncan. I'll be leading the presentation as some sort of background to you for your reference. I've been at Not Sport since 2002. I've led the sports pitch side of our business here at Not Sport since 2006. So been involved with a fair few schemes in that time, covering new build projects, resurfacing and conversions and everything in between. As I say, England Hockey have been working with Not Sport, and Not Sport have been working with England Hockey for many, many years. And so what we're going to cover today is hopefully some information that you'll find interesting and relevant for those of you that are working on schemes at the moment and are looking to develop either resurfaces or new build projects, or have an aspiration just to learn a bit more about what's happening in hockey. I understand there's already been a question about dry turf. Are we going to cover that? So yes, there is content about dry turf as we work through. So welcome everybody that's on the call. As I say, I don't use Zoom very much, so I'm not going to claim to be able to do anything fancy or overly special with this. I'm just going to talk into a screen and hope you can all hear me. As I say, please use the chat function for questions and I'll do my best to answer them. And Joe, and as Joe said, Simon, Joe's colleague, will be on the call as we work forward, so he can answer anything specific about facility development if you've got questions on that. So will my mouse and everything work? Here we go. Right. So here we go. So we'll go into this. So the content of the presentation today is discussing ways and options and ideas to create sustainable facilities. And we've done some of this topic on other presentations into Europe in years gone by. But today we're going to focus on developing projects in the UK, which is, for Not Sport, our sort of bread and butter, if you like, for our business. So the content is to introduce you to concepts around sustainability within hockey, how you can integrate that sustainability into a project if you're indeed working on it, or as I say, I've got ideas and aspirations to develop hockey projects, facilities. We'll cover the surfacing developments that will include the dry turf as much as we know it at the moment. Also include some other areas for you to consider, and then realistically the aim I have at least is for you to go away from this webinar with some ideas, and also for you to have some questions if and as you're developing your project, questions for you to ask your project team to ensure that you're getting the best advice and best information. So that's the aim. I'm going to, invariably I do anyway, talk quite quickly. So we'll do our best to get through as quickly as we can and make sure we've got enough time for questions and answers. So here we go. So sustainability, where does it fit? And what does it look like? Well, this slide, and as we go through this cycle, it's designed to try and set out very clearly that sustainability should be right at the heart and start of any conversations you're having around facility development. It's very hard to suddenly get through 3/4 of a project and then suddenly think, oh, what should we do about sustainability? Because talking about sustainable solutions invariably means you're going to have to consider that from the earliest stages, because it'll inform various elements of your facility design and project as you work through. So right from inception and feasibility stage, when we're engaged with customers, we're already then talking with people about how sustainability can fit into their project. And sometimes it's easier or more difficult depending on the site specifics, the project parameters. And that will invariably lead to conversations about what design options there are with regards to sustainable solutions, different innovation, and other factors that you can create, which will also then inform how you can construct your pitch, how you manage the pitch, and then ultimately in 10, 12, 14 plus years time, what that means for your pitch resurface. So probably very clear, even just on that initial sort of overview. When we're talking sustainability, what you decide around things today will have a direct impact on what you can and can't do moving forward, either within a project time frame. So if you're thinking about doing a project now and you're at feasibility stage, you haven't gone through planning on a new build, realistically, you're probably looking at best tail end this year, probably constructing next year. So you need to be making those sorts of decisions now before you get to the construction phase. And equally, if you're looking at a resurface, trying to squeeze in now sustainable solutions into a summer build for this year, still probably possible up to a point, but it's much better to be considering this from as early a stage as possible. So one of the big things that we advocate is that you're engaging with people, hopefully like ourselves, that are talking about sustainability right from the outset. Because if you don't, it makes it quite difficult to integrate sustainable solutions later in the day. Not impossible, just harder. And realistically, that then becomes a conversation about not just a pitch that you're building this year, not just about the maintenance of your pitch in the next 5, 10 years, not just the resurfacing 10, 12, 14 years, but also decisions that you're making today that might mean there's implications for how you can resurface your pitch in 25 years, 30 years time. So we're typically engaging with customers and talking to them, yes, about your project now, because that's what you're living and breathing, but also about those design choices and solutions that can impact on positively or negatively what can happen in 10, 20 or 30 years time, maybe even longer. And the reason for that is that if we're doing our job right as designers, and I should make it clear that Not Sport, for those of you that don't know us, we're not contractors, we're not manufacturers, we are what we believe specialists in the design of artificial turf, sport playing cricket facilities. Obviously, we're focusing on hockey here. So our responsibility in the hockey sector, working with Joe and Simon, who's now joined the call, is to ensure that we are designing good quality, sustainable, well thought through hockey projects as we work with our customers. So we're focusing on the design of projects here. There would be a completely different presentation to give about how to construct sustainably using electric vehicles or whatever it may be to reduce CO2 emissions. We're not covering that today in any great detail. We're talking about the design of facilities and how we can incorporate that into projects. So how can you think about sustainability as a club or as a school or as a club partnering with a school or an asset owning club if you're lucky enough to be one? And invariably, these are conversations we're having regularly. I was just before the call talking to Joe from England Hockey about a meeting I had yesterday, and we were talking around this because it was a first meeting considering a new project. And so what we want to do right from the outset is understand what it is you want. Because if we can't do that right from the outset, then it's very difficult to then talk about specifics around how we can incorporate sustainable design or even just general design. So we want to understand what it is your performance requirements are, because that'll inform us as to what types of surfaces are going to be viable for you. Equally, what you want now might be a facility that meets your requirements in 2024, 2025, or in a period of time. But in 10 years' time, you might have aspirations to have crept up the pyramid and want to play National League hockey, which might bring around future considerations. Are you looking for community usage if you're a school? Are you a hockey club partnering with a school where community usage will be an integral part of any scheme, almost certainly? Is that community usage going to include different sports, whether that be football or lacrosse even, or tennis, netball, whatever it may be? We're increasingly also talking to customers around pitch size. So not every project we do is a full-size pitch or a nice, lovely double pitch down in that bottom right-hand corner there. The upper right facility there is a 61 by 40-ish sort of circa half-size pitch, because that was the brief that best met the requirements of that particular customer. So it's not always necessary to consider leaping from no facility to a full-size facility. You can also consider different facility sizes, and with that, training use, if that's the underlying sort of desire to achieve. So ensuring that we design sustainably doesn't just mean that we use a fancy new base system or surface. It's also ensuring that the facility is sustainably designed for the requirements both now and then moving forward with one eye on the future, ensuring that there's either future proof within the design for additional facilities or to grow if and as required. And then underpinning all that is what ground conditions you have. So if you're on a very boggy site, that might mean that we've got to build a base in a certain way, create additional drainage, which might implicate or create implications for different design choices for base construction or shot pads or whatever it may be. And the next slides pretty much go into that. But very much what we want to do with every customer with whom we engage is to come out, having spoke on the phone obviously, but come out and then see your site, understand your aspirations, your project parameters that you might call it, any external stakeholders, so that we can go away and produce a feasibility report that will give you some really accurate information. Almost certainly probably create more questions than answers at that stage because it's so early, but start to create a working document against which you can make some informed decisions about how to move forward and how your project could take shape. So facility rationale is really key, because if we don't understand that, then we could be designing something that isn't going to be right for you, or that is right for you today, but not right moving forward, if and as you want to grow or aspire to different levels of hockey. So from that conversation, almost certainly we'll be in a position where we can discuss various design features, many of which come about with different sustainability features, options or solutions available. So we're just going to cover some of the more obvious ones here. We're not going to get into every single sort of type of goal or hockey stick or construction technique, but we're going to give you some ideas of what you could do, or indeed what commonly we see on projects that then inform the design and that then inform what you can and can't do from a sustainable design point of view. So invariably, on a new build project, one of the biggest things any of you that have been through a planning process recently will know is that there is a huge amount of attention paid to sustainable drainage solutions. Sometimes it's called SUDS. And on every scheme, new build wise, we have to ensure that we design your facility to meet the SUDS requirements, both nationally, and then encompass any local restrictions or requirements that are dictated to us by planning officers or the planning authority, or indeed the Environment Agency. And the reason that we start with drainage is that it's the sort of lowest, if you like, in the construction profile, the lowest point of the work. And what we do with the drainage and what we have to do to comply with the drainage requirements will often dictate how deep your base construction is, because one of the sort of tenets of sustainable design solutions is trying to, as much as practicable, retain as much of the water that falls on the pitch within the base construction in a sustainable way. So what we aren't then doing is overloading existing drainage networks and causing flood issues either locally or downstream if we're connecting into watercourses and what have you. So right from the outset, what we need to understand about any site from a new build point of view is it in a flood zone? Is the underlying ground condition got any percolation in it? are we going to have to consider local flood prevention criteria that might inform how deep we construct the pitch? So as an example, typical profile of a hockey pitch is to construct on circa 300 mil of stone. So in that bottom right-hand corner, you can see a stone layer being installed across the pitch and a pipe sort of running into the distance there, which will be a carrier drain going around. Your upper right photo shows diagonal drains running into a lowest corner, and your bottom left-hand photo shows a machine that cuts the drain lines into which the pipes are then installed. In extreme circumstances, that 300 mil of stone is used, not in an extreme example, that's a bad way of putting it. In pitch design, that 300 mil of stone is almost always used to allow some level of attenuation so that the water can be stored in the stone base in a sustainable way, and we can control the flow out into a drain or a ditch or whatever it may be. In an extreme example, we might not have an outfall. So what you then have to do is increase the depth of stone or attenuation capacity in some way within the pitch footprint. And if you do that, if you increase the stone or have a requirement to increase the stone depth, then obviously that implicates how much stone you need, which is a quarried material typically. So there's an impact on the environment from that in terms of sustainability. And also then implicates what you can and can't do in terms of building different types of base construction. And as we work through this, what you'll hear me say repeatedly is what we are required to do, or decisions that are made or forced upon us by planning policy on things like drainage, will directly inform what you can and can't do in terms of base construction. So in Europe, most pitches in Belgium, Holland, up to a point Germany, are built without tarmac. They're just built with selected layers of stone, and in low-lying areas like Holland, they're often 600 mil deep. I mentioned in the UK, it's typically 300 mil deep, and typically in the UK, we're building not just with stone, but with a asphalt tarmac upper base. If you're building deep stone layers, then you're increasing the engineering capacity in theory. So you could then be in a situation where perhaps you can consider different things on top. Equally, I'll be honest, it's very unlikely you're going to build a hockey pitch, a full-size hockey pitch at least, with anything other than a tarmac base. So what we have to make sure is that that stone layer is installed correctly in the right layers and depths, and then that we achieve, as my colleague Matthew has shown on the bottom right hand photo, installed to strict tolerances as set out by the International Hockey Federation, Sport England and what have you. So base construction is linked to drainage, and then what you can and can't do with your base construction will also dictate what you can and can't do with your shock pad, because certain shock pad solutions are really only feasible on certain base constructions. So in Europe, I mentioned they typically use stone and don't use asphalt, not exclusively, but that's typically the way it goes in Holland and Belgium in particular. So they tend to use more of the products in the upper left there, that white material that's being rolled out, and that's a version of a prefabricated foam shock pad. So if you've got a stone base, or you've got an existing pitch with a stone base, then you've got probably more opportunity to use that type of shock pad, albeit it's becoming more common on tarmac as well. In the UK, the rubber shock pad that's being installed on the bottom left photo, as I'm looking here with the paving machine and two men installing, that is a mix of rubber crumb with resins and binders that sort of creates a slurry, for want of a better description, that's then spread out with that machine to a very strict tolerance onto a prepared tarmac base. But that type of shock pad typically only works, particularly at the sort of depths that that photo is showing of 15 mil, if you've got a tarmac base. So that sort of lends itself to a tarmac solution, which is why that type of shock pad isn't then used as much in Europe. I'm just using Europe as an example, not as a benchmark to which we always should try and achieve. If we're building smaller facilities, then what we've been using recently is a thick combined shock pad and upper base product, the one in the upper right, which is a 40mm thick tile. And what that does is replace the asphalt tarmac and the shock pad in that one product. So we are at a stage where we're using that on full-size pitches. But if you're looking at doing a training area or a 60x40 like that photo showed on one of the earlier slides, then that could be an option to consider. Got a tickle. Could be an option to consider, but that again really only works if we can construct a stone base layer that is reduced in depth. So 300mm is typical. We can install that product with the right ground conditions on half that depth. Anything more than that, then it probably isn't that viable because of cost. So what you can do with drainage, what you have to attenuate to, will dictate how deep your stone is, which might mean that you can't use that thick tile system. You might not want to, but nonetheless, it might not be the right one for you. If you're then installing deeper than 300mm, maybe you've got an opportunity to consider different upper base solutions, which might mean that you use a more European style design. If you want tarmac, then you're probably looking at the sort of bottom left-hand type of shock pad more so than anything else. And in particular on a resurface, I would hazard a guess pretty much everybody on the webinar will have a hockey pitch, if you've got one, with a tarmac base, which then means you forget your upper right option, you're probably down on your lower left option there. And with that becomes implications as to what you then can and can't do with, you're probably ahead of me, the surface. So not every surface is tested on every shock pad, it's tested on every base. So we aren't a manufacturer, as I said earlier. We work with 14 and FIH turf producers, all of whom have got different grasses and surfaces that are tested on different shock pads. So when we come out and talk to customers like yourselves, and hopefully we'll have the opportunity to talk to some of you on this call in the weeks and months to come, we aren't here with a hockey product saying this is our best one and let's go for it. We'll be saying, right, here's 6, 7, 8, probably no more than that, options that would meet your criteria. Let's go and see some pitches that we've got installed elsewhere with these systems, so you can start making the informed decision about what surface option is right for you, not just from a playing characteristic point of view, hitting a ball around on these pitches, but also from a maintenance, from a durability, and going back to one of the earlier slides, ensuring that anything you decide surface-wise isn't just great for hockey. If you've got other stakeholders anyway, you'll need to ensure that that surface is great for hockey, admittedly, but also going to work for the other stakeholders, whether it be a school or other sports that might want to play on it. So surfacing is not dictated by what you can do underneath, but it is informed by what you can do beneath with different shock pads and base constructions. If this button works, I'll go back. So whilst we're covering projects with elements more so for new builds, realistically, every resurface should at least consider the base construction. What is it that you've got currently? More than likely on a call about hockey, you're going to have a base constructed with tarmac, which is that upper left type photo there with the Aggregate Industries lorry on it. And then if you've got a tarmac base, chances are, not always, but chances are, you're going to have a shock pad of the in situ rubber, which is the bottom left photo. So if you're looking at a resurface, you're more than likely going to have to replace like for like, i.e. if you've got an in situ rubber shock pad, you're probably going to need to have another one, because that layer regulates any deviations that may or may not exist on your tarmac. So it's a regulating layer as well as the shock pad in some ways. I don't want to get bogged down on that. I'm just trying to illustrate some of the sort of things that we need to consider and that we'll inform you about if and as we meet you on site, and certainly things that you could be considering from this webinar. Typically to date, there's been 3 types of surface. There is sand filled, which I think isn't really, it looks like it's the top right, even if it's not. I think that one was actually a sand dress just taken quite quickly after installation, so the sand had embedded in. But nonetheless, sand filled, sand dressed, and water based. They're your 3 sort of hockey surfaces, with 3G generically as sort of 4th generic type of surface, but obviously that doesn't suit hockey. So we're not going to focus on that. So still today, 2024 moving forward, those 3 surface options are still sort of viable depending on what your project brief is and the different types of stakeholders. As a brief overview, and I have to be broad here, so there are nuances beyond what I'm about to say, but generically speaking, sand-filled surfaces are the most durable, I suppose, and the most versatile, and last the longest, and they're the oldest sort of technology. Sand rests are an improvement for hockey because you're eliminating some of the sand that might lie close to or on the surface, and because sand filled, as the name suggests, has sand filled all the way up to the top of the surface pile. Sand dressed surfaces, for those that don't know, have a dressing of sand, as the name suggests, which fills this carpet up to about halfway, 2/3, depending on the exact product type. So what you end up with a sand dressed surface is the sand stabilizing the fiber structure, but you as a hockey player and club playing on fiber, which reduces the variation in ball roll and bounce from a sand filled surface, which might have a higher bit of sand here compared to a lower bit there, which might to a degree impact on ball roll and ball bounce and traction and stuff. So typically speaking, sand rests are correctly seen as a preferred hockey surface to sand filled, but that's not to say that sand fields don't work for hockey. If you've got a sand filled surface, there was almost certainly a good reason why you had it at the time and why it could still be a viable option now. Water-based, as I mentioned, are the 3rd type of generic hockey surface. They are really for your elite level hockey facilities. So you typically see them at your Surbiton's, your Holcombs, your Beestons, and then universities and independent schools for elite play or that sort of level of hockey, international hockey. The issue that you have trying to retrofit water-based facilities onto sand-filled or sand-dressed isn't so much the construction. We typically build tarmac in the UK, so that's consistent. Typically isn't the type of shock pad because we can overlay that tarmac with an appropriate shock pad, like one of those in situ rubber shock pads we saw on the last slide. It's more that you've got to retrofit an irrigation system, a storage tank, and a load of cannons and sprinklers at 6-figure costs typically. So trying to retrofit a pitch to water-based isn't the most practical thing to do. It's achievable, but more often than not, if you haven't got a water-based pitch already, it's not really that common that you'd retrofit a sand-filled or a sand-dressed to water-based. Equally, water-based pitches don't really have a great position when we're talking sustainability-wise, not globally anyway. In the UK, obviously, we've got a fairly inclement weather. We have a lot of rain, so we aren't as restricted on water as parts of the rest of the world where hockey is trying to grow. And the reason that dry turf, which is the next slide, has come about is, without getting into the politics of it too much, but as an overview, the next Olympics after this year is in California. So this is an example, but is in California. California has huge issues with water, i.e. a lack of it, and they have to be quite controlled on what they can and can't do with their water. To then have the hockey coming in as an Olympic sport in 2028 saying, well, we need up to 18,000 litres of water every hour for the time that hockey's played, for the week it will be, as part of the Olympics. It isn't going to wash in, California. Equally, of the IOC member nations, the Olympic countries, only I think around 90 actually play hockey to Olympic level or any level. And partly that is because to qualify for the Olympics currently, you've got to qualify on a water-based pitch. So if you're, again, stereotyping wildly, but if you're in a part of the world where there is real drought or heat, and you're then having to build a hockey pitch and irrigate it and water it when you want to play on it for what would be probably in those countries quite a niche sport, it's not going to be an easy sell politically, sustainability or environmentally. So dry turf has come about because, rightly in my opinion, and others might have a different view, the FIH are trying to grow hockey around the world and remove the requirement or reduce the requirement for Olympic qualification, World Cup qualification on water-based pitches, because then you can build a pitch without irrigation and, you know, effectively tell countries that you're going to have to water it to that sort of 18,000 litres a time, and then again at half-time as well. So surfacing-wise, on a general project within the UK, we're typically looking at sand drests, with some within schools sand filled, and then the odd university, independent school, elite hockey club, or water-based. Moving forward, we've also got that one that we're looking at there, dry turf. So that's a close-up of a dry turf innovation from a manufacturer based in Europe called Greenfields. They're one of the bigger manufacturers in Europe and around the world, particularly for hockey innovation. There are also dry turf which look basically like water-based, which is why we thought we'd put that photo up, because it does look a bit different. But basically, if we had other photos of the other dry turfs from Politan, Larno, Sis, and I think there's one more as well, maybe Adel now, very recently, they will look like a water-based pitch. So there is innovation. Some people have innovated to the point where they're creating very different looking hockey turfs, like that one there. Others have innovated and taken the best of existing water-based surfacing and then almost sort of, not doing it a disservice, but re-engineered the yarn that's used in water-based to comply with the dry turf technology. And what dry turf will mean is, moving forward, and this is a bit, I won't say guesswork, but this is sort of gut feel, as it evolves, as improvements are made to even the products that are available now, it will start to be seen on a par, if it's not already, with water-based. The reality, though, with dry turf is that, as far as I'm aware, currently there's no dry turf finished in the UK. I think there's a couple of pitches that are close to being done. We've got customers that are looking at using dry turf this summer. So by September, October, there'll be some in-the-ground facilities that I'm sure many on the call will go and see and play on in their various leagues or representing your clubs. But at the moment, it is so new, it's basically a European installation. The feedback on those pitches, the reason we got a photo there of that one is that that product installed in Holland on 5 sites now, I think. The feedback at club level has been quite good, and it's sort of resulted in more people interested in seeing it on their pitches, I suppose. But there's still a question mark about how it will perform after 2 years, 3 years, because those pitches were only installed September last year, and some of them were being installed in November when we were over there in Holland ourselves. So it is very new. Now, that attracts a certain proportion of the market because people want to be seen as early adopters, particularly of sustainable solutions. It can put off customers because they don't want to be seen as taking a risk early on something that might not deliver on what the marketing and technical information suggests. So there's no right or wrong option. What's arguably the most sustainable way of choosing your surface is to understand the implications both in the short term, medium term and longer term of those choices, so that you can make an informed decision as to what's right for you now. And I go back to what I've said already, thinking ahead to what that might be in 5, 10 plus years time. So we aren't going to sit here and start advocating dry turf everywhere. I do think it's got a place. I do think as pitches are being installed, it will attract customers and clubs like yourselves on the call. It will probably put off some of you because some of you will think, well, actually, yeah, I'm not great on that. So my experience, personal, this is not me advocating or saying anything that you might find, but having played on those pitches, it is very, very, that particular product is very, very fast, which I quite liked. Other people were less convinced that that was a good thing. And one of the clubs we visited was saying to us that for junior coaching, for example, they're having to change the way they coach their children to get them to play to feet rather than into the space, because it's so fast. As soon as that ball's gone, it's gone. You're chasing it and you'll never catch it. So within reason. So there's different implications of that. So again, our job is to try and give you the best information and advice that we can get, show you some of these pitches, which is going to be easier moving forward as clubs start using them, and then you can make an informed decision as to what's right. The other implication of all this is as well, is if there is an aspiration or a view that you might want to go from Sandrest to Sandfield to Sandrest in the future, or Sandrest to dry turf in the future, then what we would want to do is make sure that we future-proof the design underneath the surface so that you could simply lift up the surface in theory and put down a new one. Now that can be quite difficult depending on what your base construction is, because we've already explained that certain shot pads don't always work on existing bases or different bases. So again, I can't sit here and go, here's a one size fits all. If and as we come out and visit you, or if and as you're talking to companies within our industry, these are the sorts of conversations you need to be having to make sure that whatever you invest in today is going to give you what you need moving forward, and give you options, if you want them, for different things that might come onto the market moving forward. And that leads on to the final point on dry turf. My view is there are going to be products that are launched as we sit here today. Some of them are launched already. There's going to be products that come onto the market in the next 12 months from other manufacturers. Some of those might be as good as or not quite as good as what's already out there. But in 3, 4, 5, 6 years' time, I would hazard a guess, and it's reasonable to assume that those next generation of dry turfs are probably going to be better than the first iterations that we're looking at now. So if you do go down the dry turf route, you've got to go into that with your eyes open and accepting you're buying innovation that will always develop. And so in 5 years' time, another club will probably get a better version of what you've got now, but you're buying the latest innovation, I suppose, or investing in the latest innovation as much as it's available today. So that's a consideration. It was the same thing with LEDs, 6, 8 years ago. What were the LEDs 6 or 8 years ago are now superseded because technology's developed again. So all these things are only right. It would be remiss of us to suddenly go, right, everybody, let's go dry turf because of all the things we've just covered for the last few minutes. So in summary on surface and how you build a pitch, what you do with your drainage will inform your base. What you do with your base will inform your shot pad. What you do with your shot pad will inform what you can do with your surface. So I probably could have just done that and we'd have been 10 minutes further into the presentation. But anyway, hey ho, we are where we are. So surface developments beyond just dry turf, and that top right photo is a sort of pull out of the pictures that we saw in Holland in November of that dry turf product. So that's it close up. That's it further away. So you can see actually that as you look across a pitch, it doesn't look that much difference. It's just that close up that does. So surfacing developments. So top left is a Gen 2 mugger. So I've mentioned that you don't always have to build full-size pitches. If you're not doing full-size pitches, and a training facility would be sufficient, either in partnership with a school that wants to introduce hockey or just meet your current demands, then Gen 2 is a joint standard developed by England Hockey, England Netball and the Lawn Tennis Association, which is why it's marked out for tennis, netball and hockey fives as it is there. You can also do five-side football on it, which for schools is obviously going to be more often than not something they want to do. And if you're doing the smaller facilities, then you can go to those sorts of more newer base innovations, that tile system. And there could be, as there was on this job with very poor access, some benefits to go into for a more prefabricated base solution than trying to import lorry loads of stone and tarmac. Equally, you might have perfect access and that's still the best thing to do. So, but surface development, Gen 2, we're doing a lot of projects with clubs and schools as partners, as joint stakeholders, either a pitch that's in a school site where the hockey club's going to go in. And invariably, Gen 2 is something that meets their requirements because it will give you a really good level of hockey with a Sandrest surface. Equally, it will give the school compliance for tennis and netball for their curriculum. If you did a full-size pitch in Gen 2, or just generally a full-size hockey pitch, it can accommodate a 200-metre running track. It can accommodate 9 netball courts, 12 tennis courts, You can subdivide it for different sports. Obviously, you can do bat and ball games like rounders and things. So again, if you're a club looking to develop a project with a school, then Gen 2 could well be something, well, it should be something that comes up, and it could well be something that you see as creating the most sustainable overarching design solution, because it gives a bit of everything for all the different stakeholders. Bottom left is a product, again, I'll be 100% transparent, is one that we've been working on. Again, it's not going to be a product that we put on full-size pitches. It probably isn't even ready yet. Well, it's not ready for Gen 2, but about 4 years ago, we were trying to second guess the way the world was going. And so we've tried to develop solutions that are non-plastic. So that is a close-up of a carpet that was just installed at Lords, so cricket, not hockey, but it's just a teaser to say, if that goes well, and if things go on some further trials on ball game areas, it could be something that we look at there. So in terms of sustainability, not to knock anybody who offers plastic products, because all artificial turf is pretty much that at the moment. But if we want to go into areas with very high levels of sustainable sensitivities, national parks or whatever it may be, that could be something that we come at it and present on in the future. At the moment, it's just there as a teaser, just to say these are the sorts of services innovations that are happening. Repeat myself, it's not ready for hockey to any great degree, but maybe in 12 months' time, it's something that we can look at as trial sites moving forward. And then in terms of sustainable design, it's sustainability in the sense of making sure that the design and the installation is going to meet your requirements. Again, keep going back to the phrase future-proofing, meet your requirements now and in the future. So do we incorporate spectator fencing, low level, as you can see in that bottom left? You know, do you want colour fencing? Do you want netting on top of fencing? Do you want full height fencing? And again, everything's, you know, available to you there. There's no great recycled fencing solution. There is a like a plastic product, but it's not really that conducive for hockey, because the hockey ball strike stuff is going to damage it. So we're really in the realms of fencing. In fact, they're all rigid panel, what's called rigid panel fencing. For hockey, more often than not, we're actually doing more rolled welded mesh that we'll touch on here. But yeah, fencing, make sure that that's designed and got ball catch netting above it if you need that. And then lighting, I've already touched on that. Pretty much the entire market has now gone to LED, with some exceptions. If you've got certain types of bats or feeding patterns that LED doesn't suit. So lighting, the good thing for anybody on the call is that lighting is ever more controllable in terms of light spill. There is zero light spill vertically now on any project. So these photos, you can, certainly the bottom right one, you can see there's no like orb above the pitch. Everything is directional onto the pitch these days. So we can pretty much guarantee, as long as you're working with reputable providers, there's zero upward light pollution. As you can see on these pictures, photos I should say, that the control on light spill is extremely good. If you're working with, you know, some of the leading lighting companies, it is incredible what they can do with light spill and control. So LED is both sustainable from a pollution point of view, and also running cost wise. So a lot of projects we're doing now, as the weight of the LED unit is reduced, we can work with lighting companies that can retrofit LEDs onto existing masts. Now that does need checking. It's not again a one size fits all. Your masts at your specific site might not be suitable, but there's a reasonable chance, based on experience, that we can retrofit LEDs onto existing masts, and then you get the running cost savings, which are quite compelling compared to traditional metal halide lamps. So sustainability of lighting, going down the LED route, and controlling light spill and reducing running costs, which is only a good thing for an environmental and a business case point of view. Other areas consider, additional features, they are what they are. There's recycled products going into goals and team shelters and etc. etc. So again, what we would want to do, and what I suggest you do, is just cover everything that you're looking at for your specific project. There's probably going to be more options than others in certain areas, but yeah, certainly worth considering. It's not just the pitch itself, it's everything that goes with it. And then sustainable features outside of the pitch, if you want to call it that. So trapping microplastics is going to be a hot topic moving forward. There is a EU-wide ban on intentionally added microplastics, into which the black rubber crumb on 3G products infills falls. So in Europe, the ban was signed into law by the EU in August last year. There's an 8-year transition. We're not part of the EU, so we haven't adopted it yet, but that 8-year transition to what will be 2031 is likely, don't hold me to it, this is again my gut feel and what we're picking up, is likely to be the date that the UK adheres to as well. So I think there's no real appetite to look at this at the moment with a general election looming. So any government coming in or retaining power will probably have to consider that ban that the EU have implemented in August, because Britain, to nick somebody else's phrase, can't be seen as the polluter of Europe, or won't want to be seen as the polluter of Europe. So if that ban comes in, 3G market's got a bit of a problem, because the black rubber crumb will fall part, it is part of that ban. And so in Europe, they're already moving away to different types of infills. We, as a company, have done the first corn infill pitch for a 3G down in Yeovil. There's other types of infills as well. And what we're trying to do is demonstrate to the European ECHA, the European, I think it's Chemical and Health Agency, that we can retain those microplastics on the playing area and then deal with them through maintenance, so that they're controlled, they aren't getting out into the environment. So the types of grates that you see there outside the pitches, moving forward, I think hockey, although we don't use rubber crumb in the surface, the next thing that will come along, almost certainly it seems from sitting on these technical committees, is what happens to the fibres as artificial turf wears. And hockey isn't exempt from that, because your hockey surface will wear and those fibres will break down. So we will need to demonstrate that we can trap them, control them, and as I say, get rid of them under a controlled maintenance. So, stamping your feet on grates and things and brushes as you walk out is going to be part of what we'll probably have to sign up to moving forward. So this is a glimpse of what's happening in Europe, and then where hockey might have to follow. And again, this is my opinion. This isn't an FIH thing. It's not necessarily even an England hockey thing. But I think we believe that this is likely to be a route that we are going to have to look at, because we want to be sustainable. We want to demonstrate best practice, and we want to demonstrate that we are environmentally sensitive and doing what we can to prevent microplastics getting into the environment. Just finally on this slide, we're also, the next slide talks about recycling. The bottom right photo is a recycled artificial turf product. So the turf gets lifted up on resurfaces. It gets sent to a plant in Scotland currently. They're hoping to get a secondary plant as well elsewhere. Currently in Scotland, and then they'll take that artificial grass and I forget the exact term, but basically turn it into kickboards that look like that. And obviously then we're repurposing, recycling older turf and putting it back into a pitch design. You can take your view as to whether you think it's nice looking or not. It looks better from a distance, I think it's fair to say, but it does do a job, and we're starting to see that work quite well. As everything new, there are limitations to it. So the limitation with that product is it doesn't really work on rolled welded mesh fencing. So as you can see here, that's on a rigid panel fencing like the other slide showed, which isn't always the type of fencing that you might use on a hockey pitch. And equally, it's quite hard to retrofit to a fence that has been up for 15 years because those boards are pretty heavy. But nonetheless, it's a great step forward, because the industry to date, without that, wouldn't even have a recycling plant in the UK. So we have got that, and we can then repurpose the product and put it back into pitch designs and pitch projects. And indeed, end of life is the next thing. So for sustainability wise, we can design a great pitch. We can use shock pads that have got 24-year warranties or 30-year warranties. We can build a base that's going to last for as long as you want it to last. We can design the fencing to make sure it's going to meet your requirements now and in the future. We can use LED lighting, but at some point that carpet is going to wear out, and at some point that carpet is going to need resurfacing. And so we want to be seen to be dealing with that in the appropriate way, sustainably and ethically. So recycling is increasingly the option. There's a lot of, I wouldn't say misinformation, but confusion and a lack of clarity within our industry, let alone with the customer sector. So I'm not going to give you what the Environment Agency say X, Y, and Z. All I'd say is be aware that the cheapest way of disposing the turf probably, well, that won't be recycling it. There is a cost to recycling, but the cheapest way of disposing the turf might not be wholly the way you might want it to be disposed of. So I'm being vague because there's good ways and bad ways of getting rid of turf, but yeah, ask the question and challenge the customer, the contractors and the designers and companies like ourselves that you're working with to find out what's going to happen to your turf, and you know, do due diligence to make sure that you're comfortable that it's going to be dealt with in the way that you're being told, because this is going to be a big thing moving forward. And as the potential owner of an asset, as the owner of the turf that's being lifted, your responsibility is undoubtedly to make sure that it's being dealt with correctly and in the appropriate way. So there is a degree of responsibility as the pitch owner, if you're the asset owner, to make sure you're dealing with it responsibly and that your contractor or your designer has designed it in an appropriate way. So that then falls back on us, but equally you're not absolved from the responsibility of this. So I don't want to scare anybody, but these are the sorts of questions, as I say, that are only reasonable to be asking. And at the moment, we've only got one recycling plant in the UK. It's in Scotland. So if you're on the south coast, it is going to be reasonably expensive to get it up there. Not beyond the wit of man, but reasonably expensive. But certainly, sustainability doesn't start and end with the pitch being handed over. As mentioned all the way through this, it's making sure that everybody understands what the design choices are and then what that means in the short, medium, and long term, including disposal at end of life. And moving forward, again, conscious of time, we'll just whiz through this. In Europe, there is going to be the implementation of what's called this product environmental footprint scoring. In Holland, they've already got their own one, the name of which is MCI, I think it's called. This is called product environmental scoring, so PEF. Everybody, no, that's wrong. Every authority and country within the EU is going to have to be seen to use this. You can take your views whether anybody actually do it, but what it will mean is every turf will have a score attributed to it for its sustainability and its environmental footprint, from manufacturing to installation to disposal. Every shock pad will, and then the theory is that every system will, because the shock pad and the surface will be put together by specifiers, designers like ourselves. So moving forward, sell you a vision for a minute, particularly those in municipalities in Europe, local authorities in this country, you may end up having a tender that says, right, we will only accept systems and solutions that achieve a score of, I don't know, arbitrary figure 3. That might be a really good score on this system, and therefore 3 is going to give that customer reassurance they've followed their due process for sustainable design, and because it's all been scored under this overarching framework. The expectation is that Britain will follow something similar, whether it's this exact one from the European Commission or not. I would suggest you're 2, 3, 4 years away from this in reality in Britain, but nonetheless, manufacturers that have got products that score really well within this framework are naturally going to be promoting this framework within the UK, because obviously they're being their commercial interests to do so. So I think sustainability scoring, if you call it that, will become something you hear about as clubs and customers over the coming years. Maybe not in the next 12 months, but in the coming years. So just be aware of it. And again, it might give you an opportunity to do some due diligence on anybody's claims that their product does X, Y, and Z, because they should have their product scored within this sort of framework within the next 6 to 12 months. So questions, and then your questions will follow. So we think, you know, everything within reason has got a place. There's no, as I say, off the shelf, here's your sustainable design for a hockey pitch. It's going to work on every project. Some people have got views on things that I'll have said here, I'm sure, that would argue that X product is better than Y product, and that sustainability on this is better than that. What that last slide might well do is at least give some sort of commonality and benchmark against which those claims can be measured. If you're working on a project now, or if you're engaging with customers within our sector or companies within our sector, or you're just thinking, you know, what sort of questions should we ask? Then I don't think anything on this slide is necessarily controversial. You know, find out what the latest developments are in sustainability. We think we're well positioned to support you on that, but, you know, speak to us, speak to others. Who can we learn from? Who's installed dry turf? Over the next 6 to 12 months, there'll be customers that do in the UK. So you'll be able to speak to them, get their experience of it. What recycled material can we use in our designs and solutions? There's recycled content in some shop pads. There's recycled materials now in some of the grasses, particularly in sort of prototypes moving forward. They'll probably become more common. Can we use recyclable materials? Can we use recycled stone? If you've got a pitch resurface, certainly anybody should be wanting to recycle and reuse and retain as much of your existing features and products as possible. So we don't want to just rip out shop pads because they're 12 years old. If they perform, and that should be the way forward. So that isn't necessarily recyclable materials, but trying to retain as much of what you've got is key. And then looking at the recycled content and materials as much as possible, easier on new builds. Can we reduce quarried aggregates? Can we reduce the impact as a result of that? The amount of lorry loads going from quarry to site, that brings about a carbon footprint. You know, can we reduce that? Certain local authorities we know have got quite strict controls, or targets, I should say, for that sort of thing. You as a customer might aspire to consider that. You might have sort of autonomy from having to do it, but nonetheless, these are sort of questions you might want to ask. What products and solutions are available that offer longer warranties? Because that might mean with a shop pad, for example, you only replace the surface, you don't have to worry about the shop pad. That will reduce the cost at that point of resurface, which might create more of a sustainable design solution for you. And what are the ways we can future-proof the design? I've gone through that enough times. And who are the people we need to contact? So you've got Joe and Simon on the call. You've got companies like ourselves. You've got the FIH, Sport England. You know, there's a level of understanding and view depending on where you sit as to what and what isn't reasonable. But certainly getting as much information for your own benefit, doing your due diligence, as I've said, is only to be recommended. And whilst I've focused on more so the environmental sustainability argument, there are 4 pillars of sustainability. There's the human level, so the supply chain as well. There's environmental, which is what we focused on. There's also the financial sustainability. So what we want to do on every scheme as well is make sure that if we're building a new project, that it's been thought through, and that not just affordable on day one in capital terms, that there's a business case that will support a resurface, because increasingly the grant side of things, and we did a webinar in November about funding, the funding side is not great. It's not going to improve anytime soon, short of a new government coming in and completely doing a U-turn on funding for sport, which isn't likely, to be honest. So we want to make sure that anybody investing in a facility now, whether it's a resurface, a conversion or a new build, does so knowing the capital costs, and then ultimately knowing, or at least having the information that allows them to understand the on cost. So this 30-year life cycle that we spoke about isn't just environmental, it's also sustainable in terms of financial, to make sure that you know what the implications are in 10 years, what's the cost, how are we going to get there to that point with sink funds and what have you? So I'm whizzing these last few because I'm aware that I've rambled on. And then we've got anything else you might come in that we would be happy to talk to you about your specific sites. I've been given lots of photos. So photos, questions. Here we go. So you have to watch a man read a question and then read it out and then think of an answer. So yeah, you can take your viewers to that, whether that's entertainment or not. So Charlie Robertson says, what do you know about injury risk on these various pitch designs? What data do you have about this and footwear interaction? The big focus now in football and rugby is that, so something we should consider, people should consider. Thanks, Charlie. Yeah, the dry turf, the initial feedback that we were given last week at our industry conference in Leicester, this is the UK industry, was that generally speaking, the performance has been good. There is some consideration now being given to what footwear is most appropriate for it, because it's reasonable to say that it is quite grippy, for a non-technical phrase, it's quite grippy. So using the types of shoes and hockey boots that you might, Astro trainers, to use a colloquialism, probably isn't going to be the right footwear on dry turf, as we've seen to date. But it is so new, I wouldn't sort of take that verbatim and think, oh well, there you go, don't go dry turf because we have to change footwear. I think everything's going to evolve over time. But certainly that was the one feedback that we've got, and I've spoke to a few people that have played on them out in Oman, and that's what they said. So yeah, I think footwear interaction with these surfaces is critical. For your reassurance, that is also probably the one area that's getting the most focus from test houses, manufacturers, and the FIH. So the honest answer is I don't think we know exactly what it means, but it is going to come out in the wash as we get more information and more experience with these dry turf projects. I hope that answers it. Angus Porter has asked, is susceptibility to frost freezing entirely unmatched to local conditions, or are some pitch solutions better than others? That's a good question. Yeah, I'm probably going to end up sitting on the fence massively here. Dry turf, it's probably too soon to say with any definitive answer. The theory is that because sand, so if you've got a sand field or a sand dress, you've got some sand, because that absorbs moisture, the theory is if you take the sand out, it shouldn't freeze as easy. I don't think we're anywhere near knowing whether that's the case or not with dry turfs. And then from an existing pitch point of view, there are so many aspects that might impact on whether a pitch freezes or not. You've already mentioned in your question shade. How well you're maintaining it, should we put it politely, the type of grass, how much sand, etc. So I don't think there's a one size fits all there. It can be things that we can look at and provide options and solutions and advice on. But yeah, I don't think there's a product that we or anybody sat here could say that is better than that to prevent it. Because it also, as another example, depends on your base construction and your shock pads. So I don't think I've got a better answer than that, I'm afraid, on that one. David Gillespie's asked, the pitch I use is starting to flood in places during some late rainfall, which hasn't happened. Is this because the base is slowing down drainage of the water? That was fast, wasn't it? I'll read that out again. So David's pitch is starting to flood and during rainfall. That hasn't previously happened. And so David's asking, is that because the base is slowing down the drainage? Without knowing the pitch, seeing it, I can't say for certain, but 95, there's an arbitrary figure, but a huge proportion of pitches, 95+% of pitches that start to hold water, flood, to use your phrase, do so because there's a level of contamination that builds in the surface pile over a period of time, whether that's mud that's taken on with feet, whether it's just airborne pollution, whether it's leaves, stuff that break down into the pile, surface fibres that break down and fall into the pile. All that builds up over a period of time and then prevent percolation through the surface through the shot pad, through your base. So it's almost certain, but not always true, that it's a surface percolation issue. And then you've got two options. You either deep clean the base to get rid of all that contaminant, put clean infill back in if it's a sand rest or a sand field, and that should improve the percolation back towards what it was originally, because you got rid of all that crud. Or I suppose there's three options. You can resurface, but if your pitch isn't that old, you wouldn't necessarily do that. Or you just accept it will flood. Obviously, I would advocate that you get an assessment made through a company like ourselves or a maintenance company, and then you can make an informed decision as to whether you want to do a deep clean. The deep clean process is commonly called rejuvenations or regenerations. They're quite pricey. They're about £20,000, give or take, on a full-size pitch. So it isn't something you should go into lightly. So getting some third-party advice as to whether that is ultimately going to be the reason your pitch is holding water is only right. But I would suggest that's more likely than there being a base issue, because of the question that you've asked. It hasn't happened before. So hopefully that gives you some reassurance. You haven't got an underlying issue and it's just a surface contamination issue. Got a couple more questions here. Manji has asked, how common is a sand dress pitch with water facility? Is this combination more acceptable to environmental stakeholders as opposed to a full water-based pitch? It's not that common, if I'm honest. It does happen. And again, there's probably a whole other presentation we could give about individual pitch designs and the implications of that. We see it more in Europe on occasion. There's been some reports that because the sand in the sand dress pitch, when it's watered, retains that moisture up to a point, it can increase the chance of algae growth in the surface. It's a bit anecdotal. I wouldn't say that's something I can categorically say, but it's a consideration with these things. It would certainly be more acceptable because you wouldn't have to water the pitch every time you wanted to play on it. So yeah, how common is it? Not very. Is it more acceptable? Probably. And then you've got dry turf as a further option. Obviously, you can water a dry turf pitch if you particularly wanted to. All of them comply dry or wet. So that is probably a route that customers looking to resurface water-based pitches will follow in the future. They'll probably, certainly in 5 or 6 years' time, go from water-based to dry turf, but water the dry turf if they want to, and they've got that existing infrastructure. Abby asks, I think it's Abby, apologies if I've got the name wrong. Do you have test sites for dry turf that can be visited? No, I can be blunt on that one. We don't. And as I say, I think the first dry turfs are being installed at the moment in England, and more will follow over the summer towards the end of the calendar year. So as it stands, if you want to see a dry turf in a full-size pitch environment, you've got to get on a ferry or a flight and go to Europe, or Oman, I suppose. Yeah, there's another one. But yeah, you've got to travel. But that will change relatively quickly because there'll be products installed. Anonymous, which of the sand dress products are best at the moment? Again, it's virtually impossible to say. So there are usually two. Each manufacturer usually has two sand dress grasses. They have a light version, which is your sort of entry level, and then you have like more of an elite version. All of the elite versions are of a level. I'd say there's probably more variance in some of the lighter versions. So yeah, I wouldn't say I've got a vested sort of opinion on X manufacturer's grass being better than Y manufacturer's grass. And I think it depends on your particular aspirations. So not aspirations, so perception. So we've done some projects with certain manufacturers that club's gone, that's brilliant. We've then gone and worked with another club down the road, and they've gone, do you know what, that pitch, yeah, I don't like that one. I like that other one down the road. So I think everybody's got a view on what's a good pitch, what's a bad pitch. The final point I'll make on that is, and when you come to looking at good surfaces, bad surfaces, you can have an element of what's good and what's bad as a result of how well it or otherwise it's been installed. and you're going to have an element, well, a huge element of whether you like a pitch or not from the shot pad, because the shot pad, up to a point, controls or massively influences the ball roll, ball bounce, speed of a pitch. So it's not as simple as saying, oh, that surface over there is brilliant, because it might be, but equally it could be the surface in combination with the shot pad and the quality of installation. So finishing on this question or on the answer, I always think that you can choose the best surface, if you want to use that term, but if it's installed badly, it'd still be a bad pitch. Equally, you could have one of the lighter sand dressed I've mentioned installed brilliantly, and that might be a better pitch than the best one installed even averagely. So it's really difficult to give that view as to what's best. I think you probably can criticise me for sitting on a fence, but I can only tell you what I think, what I believe. Another question's come in late. Do you have any underpitch sub-base heating products developments to reduce frozen pitches that seem to be increasing throughout December, January, February? Which, as you say, yeah, quite rightly, is 3 months of the season. No, is the short answer on that one. I think if you're building new, there are options from Europe. Obviously, Scandinavia and the countries over there face far worse conditions in freezing terms than we do. So they do have systems that they put under. And I don't want to be sort of argumentative on this point. It's going to be tens and tens and tens of thousands of pounds to install it, even on a new build, I would argue. And if your club is suffering 2 or 3 cancellations a season, is your return on investment really going to be worth the cost? That's a subjective view, but more often than not, when we have looked at it, the ultimate decision has been, well, yeah, actually, it's not worth for the type of conditions we have in the UK. It's not worth it. But yeah, you might have had a really bad experience, and if your pitch is of an age and it's got all those contaminants that we were talking about for forgive me, it was David's question, it's probably going to freeze easier because it's going to hold more moisture, and therefore it's going to be out of commission more. So perhaps another way of answering the question is, if your individual pitch, and I haven't got a name, so I don't know who this is from, but if your pitch that you play on is of an age, you might overcome the frozen issue simply by investing some specialist maintenance in that sort of rejuvenation type solution that could increase the percolation rate through the surface, which could reduce the amount of water that's held, which could reduce the chance of it freezing. So that might be another way of looking at it if it's an existing pitch. So yeah, if you're looking at a new build, I guess it's an option. It's not something that I've been aware of. I think it might be one pitch in England that maybe have it, but yeah. Apologies, I don't have a catch-all on that one either. I think that is it. I don't know if Joe and Simon have got any questions or points. So for those of you that have joined later than right at the start, my name's Duncan. I'm managing director of Not Sport. Been leading the sports pitch side of things here at Not Sport since 2006-07, and then we've been official facility partners to England Hockey since 2012. Joe Hawley and Simon Dowdy are on the call from England Hockey, so I'll pass the floor to them if they've got any questions or any points to make, or indeed any contradictions to what I've rambled on for an hour. Then away you go, Joe. Simon.
Simon here.
Sorry, Simon, you go ahead.
There
you go.
Okay. I was just going to say a couple of things. In terms of the shading on pitches, what we do find is sometimes it's retrospective if sites then have new planning applications to improve buildings or such. So we, as a team, Joe and I, we receive planning applications and we would take those sorts of things into account. So it's a thing that if you're aware of, if those on the call, if you're aware of new developments, then it is something that we need to take into account and let us know. Just drop us a line and then we can look out for Sport England applications. That was it. Off you go, Joe.
My point was just going to be around, obviously some of the questions that are coming through are really great. Some of them are still very new, especially questions around dry turf. We are working with the FIH and are trying to get as much information as possible about some of the test sites. Duncan's alluded to, obviously Oman for the fives. There was also the Olympic qualifiers, which was played on dry turf, but it was obviously watered as well in between the games. So yeah, so I think it's just a case of, if you do have any questions, some of the questions are really great. Some of them we have some answers based on current feedback, but as with everything that's been mentioned in this, the whole kind of topic around dry turf is constantly evolving. There is a site that has just, some of you have probably seen through social media, that has installed a dry turf pitch. That's down in Basingstoke. They have done that. It was originally a water-based pitch. They have the irrigation system that's around it, but they have chosen to go with dry turf on their resurfacing on the cycle that they're in now. So they've gone for a dry turf product. So there are some, and there certainly probably will come into play a little bit more. So I think if you do have any questions, you know, we don't have all the answers, but we can certainly, as the kind of the pathway to dry turf evolves, we can certainly give you the feedback that we're got the ear of the FIH, and obviously any kind of sites within the UK, we can obviously work to help and inform you on that decision-making process. Thanks, Duncan.
Yeah, no problem. And just on that point, I'm going to take 2 seconds to maybe blow our trumpet here at Not Sport, just to, you know, as a result of the way we work. As I say, we're not a manufacturer, we're not a contractor, so we work with all the turf producers that are developing dry turf. So we haven't got a vested interest, as I said earlier, in product X, Y, or Z. We're keeping close tabs. We have got some projects that we think we pretty much know will go dry turf in the next 6 months. So as Joe said, Simon said, it's a new area, and we'll learn more as we go through. So yeah, you know, there's going to be good feedback, bad feedback. There's going to be claims. There's going to be counter claims. So yeah, just do keep saying due diligence. I think that's the best thing to do. I'd just say somebody like ourselves, and there's others in the industry as well, some of you might have had good experiences with, you know, pick up the phone to people that you know don't have a vested interest in product X, Y, and Z, just to check some of the claims and others that will invariably come, which, you know, I have no issues with, because that's what each product will come with. But yeah, do your due diligence and speak to people and get some good quality feedback as these projects get in. And as I said earlier, I'm sure that you'll be playing on them as they start getting installed around the country. Good. I think I'm looking at Mark to see if there's any last minute questions. No, I think that's it. So apologies if we didn't get to your question. We've been way over an hour and a quarter now, which was the target. We got through a fair few questions there. I know Mark is going to upload this. We've been recording, so it will be shared with everybody on call and those that couldn't make it. And then at some point, keep your eye on, you know, YouTube and social media, because I'm sure it'll be made available for review as well on there. I can't imagine anybody really wants to go back and watch it from the start, but there might be bits that you just want to get clarity on and just check what was said. So yeah, in summary, finishing very quickly, conscious of everybody's time, there are huge changes coming, and there are huge opportunities to incorporate sustainable design solutions on any type of project, whether it's new build, resurface, or conversion. There are there are some really good questions that we think should be asked of anybody that you're engaged with, that they should be able to answer. And then there are things like dry turf and some of the newer innovations in base construction, surface development that are so new. Some of them haven't even been installed in the UK yet, or are just being installed, and therefore questions will follow off that, and feedback will follow. So do your due diligence, speak to Joe, speak to Simon, speak to ourselves. We'd be delighted to engage with anybody on the call and wider. We'll give you our honest view and give you the best information we possibly can, so you can start making some informed decisions as to how to incorporate sustainability environmentally, financially within your project or aspirations moving forward. I'd like to thank Joe, I'd like to thank Simon, I'd like to thank England Hockey for setting this up. I'd like to thank everybody that's attended. And yeah, thank you for your time. Please get in touch with Joe, Simon or I if you've got questions you didn't feel comfortable asking, or want to get further clarification on anything said. Thank you very much, and hopefully we'll see you soon. Thank you.